intentional meaning, in other words. There are different ways for the writers to create this interaction and establish it successfully with the reader. So, meta discourse marker are one of these tools. So here it mentions the same thing that I actually raised in the previous slide, that writers do not produce text only for talking about external realities. Now imagine you're writing an article in a specific field, or you're writing an essay in your writing classes, and you just try to express, for instance, to report some findings, or you may think that your job as an author or as a writer is only to focus on describing a special entity, but that is not true. You, in the written text, your job is not only to present those, let's say, issues related to the external reality, but also you need to present yourself there as a writer. You need to present your work and your, let's say, identity in your text. And in that way only you can be a successful writer who could establish the interaction with the readers, and you actually are able to acknowledge the alternative voices. What do we mean by alternative voices? So another aspect, apart from meeting the expectations of your readers, presenting your own personality and identity in the text, you need to take into considerations the ideas of other people. As especially in academic writing, as a person who's going to write an academic text, your job is to actually to write and express the ideas so that you can create a kind of let's say environment for everybody to express their opinions, to let all the people who before you talked and discussed about, for instance, that specific subject, to express their ideas. How we can do that? Just like reusing sentences such as, for instance, Brown 2007 also discusses that. Or, for instance, you can say Highland et al. Argue that. In that case, you are just talking about other sentences, other arguments raised by other writers, and that way, in the text that you're writing, you're acknowledging the alternative voices. You're letting your reader to hear the alternative voices, the voices and ideas of other writers in the field, alongside with your own ideas. One of the tools that help us to create this, let's say, or to establish this interaction and to meet all these needs and expectations from you while you're writing a text is to appropriately use meta-discourse markers. So the issue of using meta-discourse markers have been something that has been discussed from 80s. And one of the first, scholars in the field who raised actually the issue of meta-discourse markers and their importance in writing, and for the first time started actually to define these terms, to tell what they are and how we can use them in the text, was Van Kupo in 1985. Later, Krismer in 1989, and Highland in 1998, in 2005, later in 2012, still he's writing some, articles and books about meta-discourse markers. He has publications in 2017, 2019 about different aspects of meta-discourse about the attitude markers. So attitude markers illustrate the writers as I said, feelings. And, the writer uses them to share his or her feelings of surprise, to mention that something is important, to raise his or her agreement or frustration about something. So there are a list of words such as agree and prefer, adverbs such as amazingly, unexpectedly, adjectives such as astonished and hopeful in the text that help the writer achieve these specific goals. The next category, self-mentioned ones, as I said, they help the author to explicitly present himself or herself in the text. First person pronouns such as I, me, exclusive, we. What do we mean by exclusive? Means we say we as let's say as people who conducted this research. It's in contrast with a sentence like we love our country. In we love our country, we refer to a whole group, a society. But we, as the researcher, conducted this study. So I am excluding others, and it's only me, for instance, and my co-worker who conducted this study. So it's exclusive. Possessive adjectives such as mine and ours, and expressions such as the author. The author believes that the writer tries to explain that in these sentences you are using self-mentions to emphasize on your authorial identity, your presence as the writer of the text inside what you're writing. Engagement markers, as I said, as the elements that are used to directly talk to the reader, can appear in sentence in the form of reader pronouns. You call your reader as you. You may think like that. What do you think? Or inclusive pronoun, like we love our country. We, for instance, care about this specific problem. Okay, so you include not only you as the author, but also you include the reader, and that we has kind of inclusive meaning. Directives, when you direct your actually the attention of your reader towards a specific issue. When you said that this must be noted, must be, for instance, mentioned, have to be taken into consideration, here you are directing the reader towards a specific issue. So it is as if you directly talk to your reader and telling him or her, you need to pay attention to this issue and you need to raise, for instance, your awareness. Imperative verbs and predicative adjectives such as it is vital to, and it's important to, it's essential that, these expressions are called predicative adjectives. These expressions also, alongside with direct questions that you may ask or personal asides, and you use two hyphens and you add one sentence from your own, we call that personal asides, are elements that help the author to directly talk to the reader of the text. Now, we discussed we introduced them from Hyland's perspective, from Hyland's model, interpersonal model of meta-discourse. Now, why should we teach these meta-discourse markers? Why are we talking about them? Why do we say that they are important? So all this discussion is to enable the EFL students or to raise the awareness of EFL teachers towards the fact that we need to increase the coherence of the text, relationship between our sentences, and we need to raise the awareness of our students about these elements in the text, and they need to learn how to use them correctly. Better than correctly, let's say appropriate for the discourse that they are actually writing in. They need to know how to create this relationship between with their readers. They need to know the expectations of the reader. as the students, are writing, they need to pay attention to whom they are writing. Whether you're writing for a professor in your university, whether you are writing for your departmental, let's say all your professors in the department for departmental purposes, you are writing an article to be published internationally around the world. Everybody can read it. Who's going to read that text? That is very important, because each reader, let's say, reader community has their own perspectives and expectations from you as the writer. If you're aware of these elements in your text and the way you can use them, you learn how to use them correctly, finally we will have, let's say, autonomous and efficient writers who are aware of the expectations of their readers and who know what to include and how to explain their presence and their thoughts in the text they're writing. How to teach meta-discourse markers? So one of the ways of teaching meta-discourse markers is to use authentic text. What do we mean by authentic text? The texts which have been written, for instance, in the real world. They haven't been simplified. Those are authentic texts. So when we want to teach meta-discourse markers using authentic texts, we need to apply some specific strategies and we need to decide what kind of exercises, what kind of activities, what kind of tasks we can apply to use this authentic text that we have. Poltridge is one of the actually people that have conducted some studies in this area. He mentions that meta-discourse markers is clearly actually a discourse element, a discursive elements. So we need to develop the, let's say, discourse knowledge of our students. We need to say that to raise the awareness of our students towards contextual issues. For instance, we need to tell our students, okay, look at this authentic text, look at this article. Tell me, what is the purpose of this article? We need to ask our students, okay, what do you think was the setting of this text? What is the background of the author? To whom this author is writing the text for? What is the social status of the author? Why is that this specific author is using this specific words in the text? Imagine, for instance, in your classes, you're talking about a specific novel. So ask your students, who's the author of this novel? Why the author has used this specific, for instance, way, this specific language of writing? What was the psychology of the author at that time that affected the text? What is the ethnic, for instance, background, the social background, the age of the author? What kind of information do you have about the author? To what extent these kind of characteristics can affect the text that he or she writes? In that case, Poltridge actually emphasized that we raise the awareness of the students towards pragmatic aspects of the text. But we actually try to do something else. We said, okay, we don't want to talk about novels. We want to teach our students how to write articles. We want to teach them to be able to better understand articles and academic text because we are in English language department. So what we did, we compiled 50 English articles in the field of architecture, okay? we we decided to teach architecture students these meta-discourse elements and the way they can use them effectively in their classes, in the text they write. For that purpose, we selected 50 different architecture articles written between the years 2000 to 2015. And then we use Bruce's model. Bruce in 2008 introduced some learner activities that can be used to teach meta-discourse analysis. He mentions that in order to teach these meta-discourse markers, we can encourage our students to analyze authentic text and to find, for example, to underline the meta-discourse markers. We can encourage them to focus on linguistic, meta-discourse devices. We can have linguistic analysis text tasks in the class. We can help our students, we can not say help, but let's say involve them in some joint construction activities. And also he proposed that we can use individual construction of a text. Now, what do we mean by these actually exercises? I'm going to show now. These are words. Now, let's put them into practice and see what does Bruce mean by these kind of tasks and exercises. And as teachers, how we can design our textbook to teach meta-discourse markers. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to only show you what we did for teaching hedges in academic texts using architecture articles. So this is the first page of our unit. First, in the first page, module 1, we called it, we defined hedges. Okay, so if you remember, we said that hedges are elements that protect the writers from making strong claims, and they help us to say, okay, we are not sure about something. It's our own, perspective and our own idea, and we let other, opposing ideas to be raised in our text. You can see here some samples of them in this chart. So when Bruce talks about analysis of a text, one of the exercises that you can design for students is like that. You just select one piece of an authentic text. It has been taken from the results section of an architecture article, and ask the students to underline the hedging features. So if you take a look at it, there are some 6 hedging features, such as some of them can be verbs, some of them adjectives, some of them adverbs. So very quickly, I'm going to show you, like likely, suggested, okay, could be, could. So you ask your students to actually read this text and underline. So this way, you help them to analyze the text. So, I'm sorry. So here, this text has been taken from a results section of an article. In this part, we choose a text from the discussion section of an article. And ask again the same thing, 5 hedging feature. So that way, by showing different texts taken from different, you can take some pieces of text from the extracts, from introduction section, from methodology section, from conclusion section, to show the way that these meta-discourse markers have been implemented in different parts of an article. The second type, linguistic focus on meta-discourse marker. So in these kind of articles, you pay attention to the meaning of meta-discourse markers and the correct, appropriate use of them. This way you can show the students what are the differences between different meta-discourse markers and which one of them are more appropriate based on the context. So you see, meta-discourse markers have been used in sentences. They are actually contextual. And ask your students to choose the best one, the correct answer. Another type of helping your students to use them, to have a kind of linguistic focus, is to give the opportunity for the students, especially if your students are in the first level of writing, you can help them to make sentences with meta-discourse markers. But increase the level of the sentences, force your students to use some academic language to make some, do not indicate in a very normal sentence, this picture indicates something. No, the major findings indicates. That's the reason why actually I gave the beginning part of the sentence to the students. So that, somehow it's a kind of control writing. You help them to, write and use the language that you expect them to write. Another type of having linguistic focus activity is to, raise the awareness towards different parts of speech of this meta-discourse marker. So tell them to read the text that you had, for instance, in reading 1, reading 2, reading 3, and after that, put them in appropriate parts of speech section. You can also use translation. Actually, translation exercises are very, very useful in that case. So if you ask your students to translate the paragraphs and specifically translate the sentences that include meta-discourse marker, you can discuss first language and second language differences in the employment of meta-discourse markers in your class. Since these elements are discursive elements, pragmatic elements, you will see that there are differences between the languages, and you can have some discussions in your class to raise the awareness of the students towards the cultural differences and the effects of the the first language of the students on the target language. Imagine, for instance, in one of the exercises that I really liked, I can say, I wrote actually this has been taken from an article, it's an authentic text, and I asked the students to translate the following paragraph to your own language. When the students start to translate, they will see some similarities and some differences between the grammatical structures. They will see that when we are translating the text, sometimes we omit meta-discourse markers. Sometimes, if in English the meta-discourse markers, for instance, have been used at the beginning, we have to use it in the middle or at the end of this sentence in the translated text. Sometimes they see, for instance, they suggest that has been translated in another form completely, and when you translate it, that letter is not considered the meta-discourse marker anymore. So in this way, by raising the awareness of the students towards the differences between the languages, you will show them that you are going to, let's say, raise the awareness that do not think and translate from your language to the second language when you're writing. Be aware that each language has its own rules, and you need to be aware of the rules actually of the source, let's say the language that you're writing, your second language. There are kinds of activities like cloze tests that you can raise you can involve your students in linguistic analysis and practicing the employment of the meta-discourse markers. Cloze tests are the best examples for that. So you can take different parts of part of an authentic text. Here we have used a conclusion section of an article. The name of the article have been given, the effects of street trees on the sales price and the time on market of houses. And then we ask the students to fill the blanks this way. So you see all of them are kind of have been selected in option number 1, for example, exercise. The words are all meta-discourse markers, but that's the analysis of the student who help them to understand which one of them is the most appropriate one. Also, you can teach them lexical bundles, group of words that are used. Not only possible, it is possible that, and how these elements are used in the sentence. Help your students to actually be able to use these lexical bundles correctly. Lexical bundles can help the students to write more fluently and more efficiently their text. So you can introduce them and give them some exercises. And in the final stage, after can you hear me? Microphone is open in my computer. And in the final stage, you can teach writing, step by step. So we have pre-writing activities, as you can see here, like scrambling the following sentences. So you give different actually stages of a text and you ask the students to put them in order. Pair word writing, so you ask your students to interpret the information which have been given, still guide them to use, force the students to use meta-discourse markers and hedges in the sentences. And finally, you can come up with the final stage of writing and ask your students, by using all those lexical bundles and elements that you have introduced, to define and to interpret a table, like the diagram, like the one that you can see in the picture, and write it. So later, for instance, you can follow the same step to design your Unit 2 and teach boosters in the text. Thank you for listening. These are the references that if you are actually interested, you can use. And I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. Have a good time.